Good afternoon. I'm John Rees from the Don't Extradite Assange campaign. Welcome to this analysis programme about the judgment in court this morning. And it was a remarkable judgment from the District Judge, Vanessa Baritza, on the extradition of Julian Assange. After count, where the judge essentially agreed with the American prosecution's view of things, saying that there was no public interest defence for revealing state secrets, that journalists shouldn't behave like this. There was no political defence under British law, even though it's included in the extradition treaty. She came to a remarkable decision in the final few minutes of the judgment, where she said that because the American prison system is so oppressive, that it would be a suicide risk for Julian to be extradited to the United States, and therefore turned down the extradition, which I have to say was a shock to me, and I think to everybody else who's been following this case. So there's a lot to talk about, because the American prosecution were immediately on their feet saying that they're going to appeal this decision. Julian's not yet out on bail. There'll be a bail hearing at Westminster Court on Wednesday to decide that. But the issues raised by the case, and indeed the case itself, are by no means over, even though this has been an incredibly welcome, shocking watershed day in the case. So I've got three guests with me at the moment: Craig Murray, former British ambassador and blogger extraordinaire in this case; Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Frontiers, who's done a remarkable job attempting to and mostly succeeding in observing the case; and Kristinn Hrafnsson from WikiLeaks. So Kristinn, let me start with you. Give us your take on what happened this morning. It was a really remarkable day.
It was a truly remarkable day, and I have to admit that when I walked into the courthouse, I was 99% certain that the ruling would be in the other direction, that Judge Baritza would allow the extradition. And actually throughout, 40 minutes, as you explained, of the reading out of the summary of her finding, where she touched upon and agreed with all major arguments, counter-arguments by the lawyers for the US administration. My hope was just sinking throughout. But in the end, there was a turnaround on health grounds. And, it is a victory. It is a win this morning, and but with mixed feelings when you look at the fact that the aspects that were journalistic and were at issue there was not upheld to our liking. And so, as I said, outside the court, it's a victory for Julian, but not necessarily a victory for journalism. That's of concern. But victory all the same. But our celebrations will be cautious, especially because the extraordinary decision immediately, without consultation with the Justice Department, the lawyers said that they would appeal. Hopefully, that will be changed, and there will be somebody in their bosses in the US will see this has to come to an end. I will certainly hope so, that we will not have to go through an appeal process. Also, of course, we want to see Julian free. We want him out of Belmarsh prison. I want to see him out on Wednesday afternoon to join his family. At that point, I will step up my celebrations. But he won the battle, but the war is not over.
And Rebecca, what did you make of it? I mean, the things that the judge had to say about the rights and protections for journalists were actually pretty frightening before she got to the bit where Julian was going to be freed, essentially because of the mental health issues of putting him in the American prison system. But what came before was pretty scary.
Absolutely. In fact, that was a kind of shock twist at the end, because what she was saying, and that was the bulk of what we witnessed today, the substantive issues in the case that she outlined, it seems very much that had the mental health issues not been at play, that he would have been extradited to the US to be prosecuted there. She rejected many of the things that we believe to be true about the case, the fact that it is politically motivated, the fact that it is about journalism, it is about free speech. And we very much would have liked to see a stronger position from the court on that today, because what that means is that the door is left open for this sort of case to be launched against anybody else. I think every publisher, every journalist, every source should be concerned still about the precedent that the targeting of Mr. Assange and the way it's been done, that could still have similar results for others, whether from the US government or from other governments. The UK government and now a UK court have failed to protect journalism and press freedom in how they've behaved in this case. And so we're very much concerned about the longer term implications that it could still have. Although, of course, we welcome that the decision was against extradition and are relieved from Mr. Assange.
Craig, you followed this case as closely as anyone. Were you as shocked as the rest of us when that final section of the judgment came up?
Oh, completely. And even by 3/4 of the way, or 90% of the way through her judgment, there was no indication at all it was going to go the way it did. And she was extremely dismissive of the defense arguments on freedom of speech, freedom of the media, and public interest, to a worrying degree. I mean, to the degree that in giving her judgment, she was simply repeating and quoting from the points made by Mr. Kronberg, as though a defense case had never been made. So yes, I was delighted, obviously overjoyed, but very shocked at the end of her judgment. But also, one important point to make, I think, I spoke with Julian's counsel, Edward Fitzgerald, after the verdict, and he explained that because the US is appealing against the judgment on health grounds, that means that the defense can appeal all the other grounds, even though they won. The grounds she dismissed can be reintroduced by the defense at the appeal, and that's an important point. And I hadn't realised that would be the case. The difficulty is, of course, this all gets incredibly expensive, and it really ought to be, the interest in appealing those points on the right to publish classified information, particularly where it reveals war crimes, the rights of the media. There are a great many interests that ought to have an interest in supporting such an appeal. But we will see. I do hope that the defense is able to appeal on all those points and not confine itself to just maintaining the ground on the health issue.
Rebecca, the grounds for appeal would primarily be, from the American point of view, or would have to be, that the American prison system is perfectly safe for an individual like Julian to be sent into it. So in a sense, any appeal case is going to have the American prison system on trial. Now, the Americans made pretty clear in court that they are going to appeal. Do you think that they've got a bit of time, though? They don't have to launch the appeal immediately. So do you think there's any possibility that they might stand back and say, well, do we really want to go here? Do we really want to challenge a judgment in a British court and defend this on the basis that, the Supermax prison is really a kind of holiday camp?
Well, there's one big thing that will happen between now and then possibly then, which is the inauguration of Joe Biden. And so we don't know yet how the Biden administration will approach this case, and it may well be more in their interest to not pursue it. So that would be one hope that we have, because that would certainly be a quicker means to an end here in this particular case. But I also think that on appeal, the US government would struggle to make the case any clearer than they already did. We heard 4 full weeks of evidence in this, and frankly, the most disturbing evidence was that related to Mr. Assange's health and mental health, and then the conditions in the US prison system. And so that won't change, that won't improve in a short amount of time. I don't see what they could say, what they could present to the court that they haven't already, because they had very adequate time to prepare their case. In fact, one could argue that they had more adequate means of preparing their case than Mr. Assange and his lawyers did, with all of the difficulties and obstacles that they faced last year. So again, though, because this case is political in nature, we believe that the whole approach was political. A political solution may be the easiest way out, which would be the case being dropped, at least the right to appeal being dropped.
Kristinn, what about that? I mean, I would have thought surely if you're part of the incoming Biden administration, you'll be looking at this now, whatever we might think about the rights and wrongs of the judgment. From their point of view, it must just look like a mess they don't need.
Yeah, let's hope that they look at it that way. And if you sum it up, basically, the judges were saying that Julian's health situation would deteriorate. It would be a great risk in the US prison system. And then you look at, well, what caused this deteriorated health? What caused this situation to begin with? So those issues are going to be basically on appeal, on trial, on appeal. And let's hope that the Biden administration sees that this is an issue that they do not want to continue on, and it has to end. When that happens, when the cases are dropped in the US, that is when we can declare full victory in the case. And you know, there is still a little less than 3 weeks for the Trump administration to come to the same conclusion if they want to think about the legacy as well, the individuals there. But it isn't something that the Biden administration, I'm sure, wants to inherit and push. Once we have that decision in the magistrate court, in the lower court in the UK, it would be nonsensical to push that. So, I mean, our hopes have become higher than before, and but as I say, we will not declare full victory until we have actually cleared journalism, and that will happen when the Justice Department in the outgoing administration or the incoming will basically drop the charges and throw this case out.
Okay. And we're joined now by Richard Burgon, the Labour MP, former Shadow Justice Secretary. Richard, welcome to the programme, and thanks very much for all the work that you've done campaigning over this issue over months now, and indeed rallying other MPs to be part of the campaign as well. As you probably heard, we've had a dramatic day in court, and the extradition was refused on health grounds, essentially that Julian wouldn't be safe in the American prison system. So I wonder if I could get your reaction to this morning's developments.
Well, thank you very much, John. And today really is wonderful news in terms of the verdict, because even if we disagree with most of the ruling, the outcome is the outcome that we wanted and what we've fought for. And I think that although this may only be the beginning of the end, really, it is a tremendous milestone. And would you like me to make some further comments, John?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
Lovely. And so I really just want to start off by paying tribute to everyone who has fought on the right side of justice on this important question, because I know that at times it's been tough. You've been disparaged, you've been isolated, but you've had truth and justice on your side. And today, I think we see the results of the principal stand that you've taken. Obviously, I want to touch upon how this manifests itself personally, because this ruling is important news on a personal level, important news for Julian, but also for his partner Stella and for Julian's children and for Julian's parents, because this case also touches on huge issues in our society. the issues of war crimes committed by states in our names, the issue of the right of the press to expose such crimes. But we should never forget that an individual has been made to suffer so much for the work that he did as a journalist exposing war crimes. So today should be the beginning of the end of that suffering. It will no doubt be a huge boost to Julian, and after the terrible way he's been treated for so long, that is crucially important. But today's verdict is not enough. Julian should be released immediately. It's appalling that he's been held on remand for coming up to 2 years, and it's especially cruel given he has been effectively in solitary confinement and that his life has been threatened by being detained in a prison where COVID has been prevalent. So Julian should be allowed out on bail. He must be free to spend time with his children, with his partner, with his friends, but also to prepare for any future legal case properly. And of course, this opportunity was denied to him in prison during this time. And keeping him in prison, I'd say, when the judge has herself identified mental health difficulties, would be a form of torture, something the United Nations has already ruled that Julian has experienced, and it should stop. And of course, the United States should not appeal this outcome. Joe Biden should, in my view, start his presidency by dropping the cases. That would be a way of breaking with US war crimes of the past. But if the US does appeal, then our Home Secretary should be clear that she will use any and all powers she has to deny a future extradition. Now, of course, there are wider political implications to the verdict today, because whilst we welcome the outcome today, the deep concerns that we raised before today's ruling still apply, because extradition was stopped only due to Julian's poor health and the appalling nature of the US prison system. The ruling made many worrying arguments regarding crashing principles, really, that we long fought for, that we must fight to uphold in the future. On the subject of political offences, the judge claimed that extradition would not breach the bar on extradition for political offences, and that's a very worrying argument, because this case has always been political. Julian Assange exposed war crimes in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Guantanamo Bay, and of course that is political. In fact, could there be anything more political than that? This has always been about political persecution, the targeting of someone for exposing matters of war, which is something the elites believe is something that only they should be allowed to consider. And so the claim that this is not political is completely absurd. And along with the Harry Dunn case and other examples, shows that the US-UK Extradition Act is not fit for purpose, it's one-sided, it needs rewriting. On the matter of press freedoms, the judge dismissed the claim that prosecution under the US Espionage Act sets a dangerous precedent for press freedom and criminalised investigative journalism. But of course it does. And it sends a chilling warning to everyone that they should not do what Julian Assange did. And that is what I would say it is designed to do, an unprecedented attempt to criminalise journalism. So in the future, we may need to be fighting for a change to the law so that no such extradition is possible from our country, whatever the laws in another country. So today's outcome is good news. On a personal note, it's fantastic news. But as political campaigners, as politicians, and as people who believe in justice, we need to be making the argument for a change in the law going forward so that press freedom isn't curtailed, so that journalists can and do speak out and expose war crimes in the way that Julian Assange did.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard, and thanks very much for your time for looking in. I know how busy your schedule is. Craig, in the United States now, when they come to consider whether or not to appeal, is that primarily something that you think just goes through the legal bureaucracy at the Department of Justice, or will there be a political input into that in the way that perhaps Richard was mentioning?
No, I think they will definitely be a political input into it. It won't simply be the prosecutors who decide. It will be the Justice Secretary who decides. I actually can't remember who that is at the moment. But Barr is out, and Biden hasn't got a new one in. So I'm not sure who today is the U.S. Justice Secretary. But it will be the politician who takes that decision. It's very hard to understand what the grounds for appeal are going to be. They can't introduce any new evidence at appeal. All the evidence on the conditions in the US political system has to be, the evidence we have already heard. And all the evidence on Julian's health has to be the evidence that Julian has already heard. Given that, it's difficult to see a point of law on which they can argue that the judge got this wrong. The appeal is quite interesting, and it was stated in court by Julian's lawyers that there's never been a successful appeal against a bar on extradition on health grounds. That a higher court has never ruled a judge was wrong where a decision is given on health grounds. So at the moment, I'm feeling very confident indeed about the appeal. And it really does seem remarkable. It must be a politically motivated decision to go ahead with an appeal in these circumstances if they do go ahead, because on legal grounds, it's very, very hard to see how such an appeal could go anywhere.
Okay, thanks very much, Craig. We're joined by Conservative MP David Davis. David, thank you very much for finding the time to look in. Now, I know that you've voiced in the past considerable concerns about the extradition treaty, and in many ways, although this judgment in many ways found in favour of the United States arguments, in the end of the day, the extradition was refused by the judge, essentially on the grounds that it wasn't safe to send Julian Assange into the American prison system. Now, this isn't the first time that an extradition has been refused on these grounds. What do you feel about the judgment and about its implications for the extradition treaty?
Well, look, it's obviously a good. Can you hear me? It's obviously a good. It's obviously a good outcome for Julian. I'm not sure it's a particularly good outcome for the progress of or maintenance of justice between the two countries in any other respect. The judge didn't make any concessions on any of those fronts. Also, I'm not even sure that Craig's right about it having going to the Secretary for the Justice Secretary in the States. Who initiated this? Was a State Department. Sorry, an individual state prosecution, wasn't it? Was it federal?
I think it came through the DOJ, didn't it?
I can't remember. Anyway, I mean, they very often start much lower down. But if he had gone, then he wouldn't have got a fair trial. I mean, foreigners never get a fair trial under the American system anyway. The points that I just heard Richard Burgon making about the chilling effect on newspaper reporting will continue, frankly. Ironically, I mean, there are protections for newspaper reporting, for press reporting, media reporting in the States. I think it's the 10th Amendment. The simple truth is an American citizen would not be able to be prosecuted for doing what Julian did. I mean, it's notable the only American case is Chelsea Manning, and that was under military law from memory. So it's not a good outcome generally. It's a good outcome, obviously, specifically, but it's not a good outcome generally. So it means the campaign has to go on. These cases will get worse, of course. The more our commercial relationship with America grows, the more we'll see cases like the Lynch case as well. And the combination of Julian Assange and the Socialist case, the Dunn case, and the other commercial cases will build quite a big tidal energy, really, into the political opposition to the current extradition treaty. And we probably need to remind people of what it was put in place for. It was put in place in the early 2000s, from memory, about 2003, something like that, 2004, when John Reid, I think, was Home Secretary, and he put it in place entirely on the basis of extraditing terrorists. And it's never been, as far as I can tell, it's not been used for that. It's certainly not been used very much for that. It's primarily been every other sort of case you can imagine, many of them with political drivers or with commercial drivers, or both. So the campaign has to go on, and probably has to step up a gear now that this has happened.
Okay, thanks very much, David. Kristinn, I guess both of us will feel that's certainly where we need to go now in terms of accelerating the campaign of using what's happened in the court today really as a springboard for a renewed burst of campaigning, if you like. What do you think are the main things that need focusing on now?
Well, as you mentioned yourself, I mean, there is and correct us upon it. I think it's extremely important now that politicians will step up in the put a pressure on the United States to back off. There are grave concerns among MPs on the continent, in many European countries. There was a statement just on 2 days ago from Angela Merkel's chancellery, where the Human Rights Commissioner expressed grave concerns about the outcome of this case here today. We see in the U.S. a growing pressure on Donald Trump to pardon Julian, which would be a partial victory, and that's pressure that comes from both Republicans and from Democrats. So by no means this is over, and you know, Reporters Without Borders and other organizations, Rebecca, you understand the gravity of the situation. We have to basically focus on the big picture. I just want to raise one point. I know I've been extremely critical of Vanessa Braicher in the past, and which led me to believe when I walked into the courtroom this morning that there was almost zero chance he would rule for Julian. And I think it's very rare that such an important and high-profile decision is taken on a magistrate level. So I think I need to give her a little praise for the courage, if I may, for at least ruling in that direction in the end. However, we may disagree with the logic behind it. One lawyer, and I'm just I don't have the exact case quote, tried to tell me that this is extraordinary on that point. It's very rare that magistrate court judges take such a decision of that nature. It is usually upon appeal, and so I'll give her a little bit of credit for that. I have to do that.
Hi, John McDonald. Welcome to the broadcast. John still has the honour, I guess, is the term, of being the only British MP to make it into Belmarsh to visit Julian Assange. So thanks for your work on the campaign, John. We were talking earlier, and we've been addressing here on the programme, just as you were joining, the possibility of the Americans deciding to appeal, as they've announced they will, or possibly they've got some time to withdraw from that position. You and I were having a conversation earlier about whether or not the kind of political wheel in all this could be pressured by British lawmakers. Give us your thoughts about that.
I just, when we spoke before, I was still in a state of shock, like you were, on the court decision this morning. To be honest, it was completely unexpected. I thought we were going to get hammered anyway. So my view is we need advice on this about who and how we lobby in terms of American decision makers. It's how can we create a climate of opinion amongst politicians and others in America that they drop the whole concept of the appeal. David Davis and I and others have made American approaches in the past. David went across with Jeremy on the time on the Guantanamo Bay cases that we had as well. And I actually do think it was pretty successful because it did formed alliances that then created a climate in which decisions could be eased to assist us in the US. And I just wondered, now David's indicated, I wonder about his advice about how we go about this. It's easy enough for us to get together a cross-party group to sign letters and make representations, but I'm not completely sure about who those representations would be made to at the moment, and we'd need some advice on that. But we've got sufficient links on the variety of human rights cases and also on freedom of expression because of the work that we've done, the NUJ and others, working with politicians and others in the States. I think we've got sufficient range of contacts that we could exercise fairly a short, sharp campaign to try and create that climate of opinion, which will enable the Americans to find a route through this to back off. I wonder if David could come in now and see what he thinks on this.
Yeah, David, you had some thoughts.
Sure, yes. Two things, really. One relating to the British Parliament, one relating to the American political establishment. When we got Shaka Amir released from Guantanamo, which was a successful the prime mover in that was John McCain. Because you may remember he had been imprisoned in Vietnam for years in a prison camp, refused to be released in order to protect his own colleagues. And so when we saw him, he was very engaged in what Shaka Amir was going through, the absence of justice and so on. And he spoke up quite bravely in the Senate, and as his man of standing he was, it had quite a lot of influence. 2 points arising out of that. Number one is that there are strong rumors that his wife will be the new ambassador to London. If that's the case, we have a line in, I think, to go and talk to her and talk to her. I mean, I had already planned if she does take it. I mean, there's been lots of story about it, but it's not been confirmed yet. If she does take that appointment, I'll write to her and remind her, welcome her obviously, but remind her of her husband's role in releasing a British resident back to the UK and the courage he exercised there, which may help us a way in. And we should go and see her, John, we and others. The second, and even if that doesn't happen, McCain's name is quite a big influence still. I mean, both on both sides in Congress and Senate, and the House and Senate, and so we might be able to sort of re-engineer that back into play. I'm of a mind to go over there anyway to talk to them about their foreign policy, with Biden having a strong interest in it, but not having yet set, and talk about the foreign policy in the next 20 years. So this might fit into that. The other aspect with respect to the United Kingdom is we return on Monday, John. It is for consideration. We have an urgent question about this case, not about the substance of the case, because we're probably restricted if it's going to appeal, but about the substance of the extradition treaty as it applied to the case. Now, the question I'd put to you is how many Labour MPs are likely to be sympathetic in that? We've heard Richard Burgon say he would be, because there won't be an awful lot of Tories. There'll be some, there'll be some who are concerned about the Harry Dunn Secoulis case. There'll be some who are sort of libertarian Tories who've got a sense of justice and so on, but there won't be that many. But it seems to me this is a very good hook to highlight the inequities in this system but it will only work if we get reasonable support in the House. You know, if we just do it and get no support, that will backfire on us.
Yeah, good point. I think the wording of, well, you know better than me, the wording of any request for an urgent question is key, because we keep on getting knocked back on sub judice all the time on this. So we need to consult maybe with one of the clerks about the nature of the wording that would be within scope to get us the urgent question. I think it's the ideal question to put down around now, because they might close down the opportunities quickly if we're not careful. I think, I don't know what Richard thinks, but I actually think we would get a range. I think because of the work the NUJ have done in particular around freedom of expression, I think we would get quite a number of Labour MPs willing to intervene, at least a dozen or so. I think we'd pick up Libs and we'd pick up some SNP support as well. So I think it would look respectable having do an urgent question, getting the statement. I think we could get a respectable number of interventions, definitely.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks all of you. I just want to come back now to Rebecca, because I think people watching here will be heartened by the discussion between Richard and Davis and John about the possibilities that they see for arguing this in Parliament. Rebecca, do you have a similar feeling that the debate around this, we can leave aside the precise sort of balance of optimism and pessimism about this particular judgment today, but there can't be any argument that the case itself has focused people's minds on what freedom of expression and what freedom of the press really means in practical terms, in a way that perhaps hasn't happened for, well, some considerable time in this country.
It absolutely has. And I think now there is greater solidarity, there is greater unity, I think in recent weeks and recent months and in quite some time. And I hope that that will continue. I hope that the implications are now clear to everybody. But again, this judgment leaves the door open still for this to happen to others. So that has to be part of this debate going forward. Because again, it was clear that had Mr. Assange not had these mental health issues, we could be looking at a very different scenario. He would have likely been sent to the US. So the implications will be in particular on national security reporting. We need to look at the reasons why and look at how to strengthen protections for journalists, especially those reporting on that beat. So one immediate measure that we would advocate is reform of the Espionage Act. So we talked about the Extradition law, but let's talk about the Espionage Act and then the Official Secrets Act here, because one of the problems is that the Espionage Act lacks a public interest defense. So had Mr. Assange been sent to the US, he would have been unable to adequately represent himself there. That remains the case for any journalist, publisher, or source, right? So we continue to advocate for reform of that act there. And then the fact that our own Official Secrets Act here lacks a public interest defense as well, left the door open for this part of the case to be a bit of concern, because the judge was looking in part at if he were being prosecuted here, what the grounds would be. And I think that was part of the problem, because we have a similar flaw with our own law here. So that's one example of stronger journalistic protections that we could see. But I think as well, this case has highlighted the changing nature of journalism, and then the changing nature of how governments are pursuing, how states are pursuing their critics and those who are exposing information that they prefer to keep hidden. I hope this has opened some important debates, and I hope that now that we have had in some ways what is a positive decision, it's at least not a negative decision, that this debate can move forward in a less polarized and less toxic manner. I hope that it will be destigmatized now, that the focus won't be so much on the many levels of misperceptions in this case, but on what's at stake and how we can work together to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else.
Craig, I mean, the last thing anybody wants out of this campaign is, well, not the last thing they want. The second from last thing they want is Julian free and press freedoms damaged. Do you think that's a danger now? Because I mean, I don't know about you, but as I listened live to the judgment, as she struck down, Vanessa Baritza struck down one after another, there is no public interest defence. There is no political exception defence in British law because the treaty isn't in British law. That there's no way in which a journalist should behave in the way that Julian did towards his sources, which most journalists do. I mean, I don't know about you, but my spirits were in my boots by the time she got to the end of that list.
No, I think, I mean, I expected the same as for you, John, probably any of us who've practiced journalism over the years in any serious way, according to her definition of encouraging people to tell you secrets being a crime, I've committed a crime against the Official Secrets Act in publishing stuff other people have told me on occasions. Not to mention the fact that I knowingly did when I was a whistleblower myself many years ago. But her much of it was deeply, deeply troubling, and especially her characterization that his encouragement of Chelsea Manning to give material was in itself a crime. I think that's something that ought to deeply trouble media organizations. There's no doubt that if this judgment stands in that way, there's a lot of very bad precedent there. It is only very bad precedent from a lower court, but I do hope that, as Julian's lawyers were privately indicating afterwards, I do hope that those aspects of the judgment are appealed. I also hope for our parliamentarians here. I think what we have seen, as David Davis was referring to earlier, is that the Extradition Act of 2003 is very bad legislation. It's part of the 9/11 panic legislation that was brought in, and in particular, Vanessa Benitez stated in terms that it was the intention of Parliament deliberately to allow extradition for political offences, that they had deliberately removed the political offence protection when they passed the 2003 Act. Interestingly enough, and we scoured the Hansards when the prosecution made that point, and it's not really borne out by the Hansard reporting of debates and what was said. So where she gets the intention of Parliament from, I'm not quite sure. But that is something, and because obviously it's going to frighten an awful lot of political refugees in this country if what's being said is you can be extradited by a foreign government for a political offence. That removes a fundamental protection that goes along with political asylum. I do hope. There's work to be done here. There's work to be done on the appeal. There's work to be done in the United States. But I do hope the parliamentarians may look at what the prospects are for revisiting the extremely illiberal aspects of the 2003 Extradition Act.
Okay. Well, look, we're coming up on our time now, so I'm just going to give John McDonnell, David Davis, and Kristinn a chance to sum up. But I have to say, I was struck by the same thing as I remember it in the hearings themselves. Even the American prosecution didn't make the case that Parliament had deliberately excluded the political defence from the extradition legislation. What they suggested was that it was in the treaty, but somehow had not found its way into British legislation. The judge seemed to go a step further and say that it had been indeed deliberately excluded and no such thing was intended to exist anymore. Anyway, on that and other points, John McDonnell, David Davis, then Kristinn, do tell us your final thoughts.
Okay, very briefly, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In terms of the step forward, we should celebrate that was a real victory this morning. It really was. And it was a victory as a result of the circumstances that Julian is in, but it's also a victory in terms of the legal representation that was secured. It was excellent and professional and expert, but also the campaigning that's gone on throughout, and it's a global campaign. So I don't think we should underestimate that, and I just thank everyone who's been involved in it. In terms of our parliamentary approach, as David has suggested, let's try and use every opportunity we can to get this back onto the floor of the House of Commons, although that might be difficult in some respects. We'll find a way of doing that to, again, part of the creation of a climate of opinion that ensures that, well, I hope that Julian is released and has some from Belmarsh certainly, but also that this case is dropped overall. But then in addition to the parliamentary activity, David and I work with others and Richard and others in terms of what representations that we can make to create the climate of opinion in America that enables this case to end. But on the points that Rebecca has made, through the NUJ parliamentary group, we'll continue to work on the issues around freedom of expression. But it is right, and I think Craig's right, we do need now to challenge some of the aspects of the decision this morning, not just legally, but also in public debate as well. Because although I never supported the extradition legislation and treaty, etc., actually we were given assurances that there would not be the use of this legislation for political extradition, if you like. And so again, there's aspects there that we'll have to take up, because we don't want the elements of the judgment this morning in some way embedded in future practice. So there's a lot of work for us to do, but I just reiterate, you know, this was a significant victory this morning, thanks to all the efforts of all those involved.
John, thanks very much for your time. David.
Yes, if I follow on from John, I mean, obviously it's a massive human victory, because had it gone the other way, Assange would have been found guilty in the States. He wouldn't have got a fair trial, and he would have faced a lifetime of misery. And it would have been a lifetime of misery, which is hard to countenance in this country, but that's what would have happened. So fantastic human victory. That being said, you know, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, to quote the American, I think. I'm persuaded, just in listening to this, that I'll try for an urgent question on Monday, John. And I would be inclined to hang it on the judge's comments. I was unable to get into the live access this morning. So if the judge actually said that this was deliberately excluded, I think that needs to be aired in Parliament, because I don't remember that at all. I was the Shadow Home Secretary at the time. I don't remember that at all. All I remember were threats from John Reid that there was one terrorism case and one paedophilia case waiting on it, and neither of them manifest themselves. So I think that has to be aired and challenged. It will be helpful. Will there be a transcript of the judge's comments available soon? Because we can use that. That would also allow John to actually reiterate in the House the undertakings and guarantees that they were given, the Labour Party were given at the time, about their protection from extradition for political offences. And it would be interesting from Kristinn if I could know exactly who it was in Germany that raised concerns over the case as well, because to be able to show that our allies are concerned about this on the same basis that we are, will also reinforce our case. So as soon as I go off air now, I will put in an application for an urgent question on Monday and see if we can get, and I'll talk to the Speaker. John, I will speak to Lindsay Hoyle as well, make the case that it's not about the substance of the case. You know, we're not going to argue about Julian Assange's mental state in Parliament, obviously, but what we can argue about is the basis, the judge's flawed decision on the basis of a flawed interpretation of a parliamentary decision, which makes it absolutely a parliamentary issue. So that's where I'll go from this, and that'll be step one in what sounds to me like it's going to be a very long march.
David, thank you very, very much. Thank you to John, to Richard Burgon, who was with us earlier, to Craig Murray and to Rebecca Vincent. But the last word goes to Kristinn Hrafnsson from WikiLeaks. Kristinn.
Yes, thank you, David. I will get to you the statement from the Chancellery, which was quite extraordinary and strongly worded. The concerns that the Commissioner on Human Rights in Angela Merkel's circle was about the outcome here today, and I'm pretty certain that the nature of the outcome this morning has not changed the concerns that she had. Now, as you said, you know, we have to celebrate this as a victory. This was a win. It was you know, extraordinary good feeling to have this outcome this morning, and what a good way to start a new year after a horrible last one. And but there are a lot of tasks that are now laying on the table that we have to sort of pick up, as you pointed out, issues that concern press freedom. And as you pointed out, the MPs here, the inconsistency and the flaws in law I was remembering as well that it was maintained that strongly that First Amendment protection in the United States would not and never apply to foreign journalists, only to the US citizens, which was quite an extraordinary statement in the process. So, I mean, there's a lot to digest after this morning, and in essence, the outcome came as a bit of a surprise. Maybe that's the cynicism of 10 years of fighting a tough battle, but we still have a way to go for Julian and for press freedom. And I would like to thank everybody who has taken, who has supported that struggle, and hope this is a new beginning, which will strengthen our democracies, strengthen our press freedom, and strengthen our right to know. So thank you.
Kristinn, thank you very much. Thank you all for looking in on this update. It was a historic decision today, but that never comes without campaigning. So to everybody who's supported the campaign, been part of it, expressed their opinion, campaigned online, turned up at the demonstrations, please keep doing it. It's an important battle. It's not the war. That's still on. And do keep in touch with us through the Don't Extradite Assange webpage, through our Twitter feed and our Facebook, and you'll be able to see the outcome of all these deliberations, discussions, initiatives that we've talked about today in the future hours, days, and weeks. Stay in touch, stay strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.